name is Nick Kellett, founder and CEO of Deploy Solutions, a Canadian company that specializes in building space apps, software that uses data from space. At last year's GeoIgnite, I spoke about our plans to create a factory to rapidly produce such apps. I also referred to an ongoing citizen-focused climate change research project we've been conducting. I am thrilled to return this year to speak to you about our findings and progress. The title of today's talk is Building Software Solutions for Climate Change, closing the communication gap between citizens and trusted authorities before, during, or after a disaster. So about Deploy Solutions, we're Canadian software developers and we are passionate about space and the Earth. We're experts in software research, development, and innovation. We develop downstream cloud-hosted solutions for the space industry. We help organize the Space Apps Ottawa annual hackathons, and we've been focused since 2019 on a citizen-focused climate change research project. And we build software solutions using data from space, from citizen-focused climate change portals to cloud-hosted big data analytics apps. We can harness space data to meet your needs using our unique software factory technology and approach. And how do we do that? Well, we streamline the software development process using a unique software factory that allows you to take your goals and objectives and your data, add them to our software factory technology, and achieve your goals quickly. And our software factory produced applications are feature-rich, easy to use, turnkey, rapidly produced, open source and standards-based, integration-friendly, secure by design, and low cost and high value. But let's talk about climate change. So the landscape is changing. And in Canada, we're warming at twice the world average. We know that extreme weather events are growing. It's a real and urgent crisis driven by human activity. And it's so serious, in fact, that in June of 2019, the Canadian federal government declared a national climate emergency and committed its support on behalf of our country to meeting the Paris Agreement targets in greenhouse gas reduction. And we know that no matter what we try to do at this point, adaptation and risk mitigation are necessary. So we are concerned about that. As a software company, we actually are worried about this. Obviously, you know, we're citizens of the world and we're affected by this in our homes and our neighborhoods. And so in 2019, we began surveying and interviewing hundreds of citizens, NGOs, scientists, and government officials, because we think that there's a way that software can help overcome top communication issues between citizens and trusted authorities. And we identified those. And now we're building software that will help. So the goal of today's conversation is really just to update you on our progress, some of our key and interesting findings, and you know, give you the top level view of our prototype and our mock-up concepts. In order to do all this work, again, since 2019, we've worked with 75 or more Canadian interviewees. These include citizens, government officials, hundreds of survey participants, mostly from Canada. We've had contributions from well over 100 students in 20 academic institutions around the world. We've had academic research using Ripin's experiential learning platform. And on the side there, you can see a list of some of the academic institutions that we've worked with, and the list is growing. And to thank everybody for their contributions on this ongoing research project, we've actually created a website, thanks.deploy.solutions, which not only recognizes them and their work, but actually gives you a good insight into the kind of projects and the breadth of the projects that we've been looking into on this ongoing research endeavor. So I encourage you to check that out. And as an example, if you were to look at that site, you would see a project outcome in this example for how to extract guidance and action sentences from PDF documents using machine learning. This is something that students at the University of Toronto did for us. So how did we embark on this project and what were our goals? Well, we wanted to see how software could help with climate change issues, but we didn't know much about the problem. And we wanted to build something that was generally useful to citizens and not something that couldn't be used. So really we had two goals. We wanted to find the worthwhile problem and we wanted to find the solution, which is the minimal viable product. And we deliberately took an approach that's been popularized called the lean approach in the book, Ash Maurya's book, Running Lean, Iterate from Plan A to a Plan That Works. So this was sort of the template or the framework in which we embarked on this project so that we could actually innovate rapidly, explore concepts, but at the same time build something that was generally useful to people. So as part of that process, we were intended to ask questions. So we wanted to leave the building and ask people, citizens, what they thought were some of the issues. And so we conducted problem interviews. We did 75 interviews. They're about 30 minutes each between January 24th and May 26th of 2020. As you probably realized, that was in the middle of a pandemic. It started before the pandemic. We hit pause when the pandemic arose, and then we wrapped up the effort about a month or two after our first lockdowns in Canada. And we worked with a variety of people, but about 60% of the respondents were with NGOs, about 8% are ordinary citizens, 19% would have an educator background. There were some provincial government officials, some faith group leaders, as well as municipal governments and businesses as well. And about 40%, the majority were from Ontario, but we also had representation from across the country. And the way we conducted these interviews was always the same. It was done via Zoom. It was time limited. We didn't want to take up too much of their time. And we always followed the same script so that we'd have consistency. So we welcomed them. We collected demographic information. We set the problem context, so what we were trying to accomplish. We asked them what they thought the problems were in terms of communicating and getting citizens to act around climate change issues. And then we started to wrap up, which included asking them if they were somebody else that they would recommend we talk to. And by doing this, we actually built quite the network of respondents, and this was actually a very effective process. And then we captured the results in SurveyMonkey so we could rank the problems. And every time we went through an interview with them, we would randomize the problems that we posed so that we would make sure that we weren't leading anybody on, and that we would get a fair assessment of what each of the participants thought the top problems were. So what were those top problems? Well, they range from citizens feeling overwhelmed by the volume and variety of information to trusted authorities don't know how well prepared citizens are. Citizens receive information that isn't true or scientifically accurate. These are all communication-related problems that citizens would have in terms of taking action. But the consistent response, and therefore the top problems, were number one, that citizens feel overwhelmed by the volume and variety of the information. Number two, citizens receive information that isn't personalized for their needs. And number three is that trusted authorities have difficulty directly collaborating and sharing information with citizens. So this is the response that we got from the people that we talked to on these problem interviews. So let's talk about that a little more. Well, citizens feel overwhelmed. It could be because they don't understand the way in which scientific information is presented to them, or the information is too complex. They're often feeling overwhelmed by the sheer volume of information because obviously this is a big deal, and there are lots of different issues related to climate change. They also often told us that they felt overwhelmed emotionally. So we kept hearing the word anxiety and despair when it comes to climate change. So this is clearly an issue. And in some cases, people said that there was conflicting information. They didn't know how to make sense of it all. Related to that is the fact that they received information that wasn't personalized. So there was a basic knowledge gap on what actions they thought they could take, especially when there's provincial toolkits and other toolkits that are done at a very macro level. It's very difficult for an individual citizen to know exactly what actions they should take in their circumstances and their geography. So related to that, they didn't feel that there was a lot of personalized guidance, or there weren't enough options that they could consider. They didn't know who to talk to if they got stuck. They didn't feel that there were clear policies done at a local level. They didn't have time to act, or they had different priorities, or they felt that they couldn't afford to act, or there wasn't really a way to assist them. And so these are some of the attitudes or some of the thoughts that people expressed in terms of this second problem, which is citizens receiving information that isn't personalized. And the third top problem is that trusted authorities have difficulty directly collaborating and sharing information with citizens. There doesn't seem to be clear communication channels between the citizens and trusted authorities when it comes to acting on climate change. Lack of feedback from the authorities when the citizens do communicate. This is something citizens express. Sometimes the authorities felt that they might have personnel or capacity challenges to communicate, which limits their ability to do so. They felt that complicated scientific information might not be clearly communicated or understood by citizens or even by policymakers at the local level often. There's a lack of trust between citizens and authorities. Who is trusted? So this is a big question, which we'll get to later. And encouraging citizen action is not considered a priority of the authorities. Again, these are people's opinions. You may or may not agree with this, but this is what was expressed to us, and this is why these are the top 3 problems. So let's talk about trust, belief, and a willingness to act. We wanted to build on this, so we worked with Utah Valley University students, and they ran 2 psychographic and sentiment analysis surveys with Canadian citizens. And this is interesting. Survey A was asking the feelings about environmental conservation, and Survey B was feelings about climate change. And people did not respond to both surveys. They were randomly given one or the other. And the surveys were open-ended questions using state-of-the-art techniques. So the questions were, how do they feel about their assigned topic, which was climate change or environmental conservation? How in control do they feel in making a positive difference for their assigned topic? What actions can they take to make a positive difference? What tools would help them make that difference? And then the Smart Lab at University of Utah Valley performed a cluster analysis and analyzed the qualitative results. So the results are that conservation topic respondents had an average feeling of being in control of about 2.62 out of 5, whereas the climate change people thought that they only had a feeling of being in control at an average of about 2.05. And so the Utah Valley University assessment was that this is not random, and therefore the people who are asked about local conservation, environment conservation, do feel more likely to make positive changes than the people who are asked about climate change. And additionally, the survey results seem to indicate that respondents in urban areas felt less in control in their ability to make a positive impact than people in rural areas. You can see a little diagram down at the bottom that shows the spread of these responses across the country. And for those of you not too familiar with Canada, the Greater Toronto area all the way to Montreal corridor, which is sort of in the bottom section there just above the United States, that's where a very populated slice of our country is. And those people do not feel especially able to control or make a positive impact to climate change action, which is quite interesting. So the Utah Valley University students also prepared a sentiment tag cloud. And here's an interesting overall finding. When describing their feelings of local environment conservation, 21% of the words were negative. Conversely, 53% of the words used when describing their feelings for climate change were negative. So what that means overall is that you can see the tag cloud of words that people used because they were responding about their feelings in terms of climate change or environmental conservation. And if you look at the sentiments of the environment conservation respondents, they tend to be more positive and happy. And when you look at the sentiment of climate change respondents, they tend to be more negative and hopeless and in despair. And I think we can understand why this is, but this is a very important message, and it's going to come into play a little later in the presentation. So more perspectives on climate change were needed. And so we conducted some more surveying online about Canadian citizens generally and their attitudes about climate change. Where do they get their information from? Who do they trust? And we did this using SurveyMonkey. We had 83 respondents, most of whom were Canadian. And the age group most represented was 25 to 34, but we also had people from 18 to 44. In general, that was the biggest range responding. And 70% of these rated climate change as very or extremely important, the number 69%, I should say. And only 5% rated it as not so important or unimportant. So there is some understanding that this is a personally important issue to a large majority of people. And the source of information that they expressed that they used the most often, and they could use multiple sources, of course, when it comes to climate change, are social media, which about 67% used to get information, or websites and blogs, 62%. They also looked at academic institutions. Some of the people we surveyed were obviously in academic institutions, and they get some information from newspapers and magazines and television and radio, but far less than you'd expect. And again, the skew of the demographics that we surveyed tended to be younger, and so this is probably only going to become more pronounced over time that they're going to get their information from social media as well as websites and blogs. So then we asked, how much would you trust information about climate change if you heard it from? And this is what we asked: if you heard it from a scientist or academic, an environmental or non-government organization, a federal government official or organization, a provincial territorial government official or organization, a municipal government official or organization, a friend, a family member, or a neighbor or colleague. And the most trusted sources are scientists, environmental groups and NGOs, and then the federal government. So we talked about trusted authorities before, and this is obviously a contentious and controversial topic potentially because different people trust different groups and different organizations. So we needed a definition for this, and the one that we came up with, a working definition, is that trusted authorities are individuals or organizations, and they have exceptional targeted knowledge and expertise of global warming and climate change issues, impacts, resilience, and or policy measures, and they can be reasonably expected to provide unbiased apolitical advice, and they accept the currently available scientific understanding of global warming and climate change as described in the United Nations IPCC reports. It's a working definition. We know actually that we need to improve on this, but this is what we started with so that we could start to gather this information. So we need to work more on this, and we're actually establishing a trust framework in conjunction with the Ontario Tech University to figure out who is and isn't trusted. When information is needed, how do we provide it? And these are complicated issues. We think that we can leverage approaches in other fields, and we're trying to do that. So this is an ongoing effort that we think will help us build a better solution and a solution that people will actually use. So this is critical, and the word trust comes up over and over again, and that's obviously not an accident. So then we wanted to know, okay, well, how could software solve these issues? So we said, how likely would you be to use a website or a mobile app that listed specific personal actions you could take to cope with climate change? And it turns out that about 68% of the people who responded to our survey would be willing to use a website or mobile app listing personal actions that they could do to cope with climate change disasters. So we think there's an opportunity here for a website or a portal to actually address these issues. And people would be likely to use it. So who are we communicating with? Well, we're talking about citizens because we're taking a citizen-focused approach. So before a disaster impact, we think that we can talk to citizens who do believe in anthropogenic human-caused climate change. So they believe it exists, they believe it's caused by humans. They are willing to take preparatory action or to lead or help others to do so. However, based on our findings earlier of the willingness of people who don't necessarily believe in climate change, but who do believe in the importance of environmental conservation locally and who are willing and empowered to act, we think that there's another group that can be addressed here as well before a disaster. And those are people who do not necessarily believe in anthropogenic climate change, but are willing to act to protect their local environment, and they're willing to lead and help others to do so. We do not think these groups are mutually exclusive, and we think that both could be addressed in order to encourage citizens to take preparatory action for climate change impacts and natural disasters. Now, that's a very different conversation, getting people ready to do something that hasn't happened yet, versus the other conversation, a disaster or an impact is unfolding or it has unfolded. How do we mitigate it? How do we adapt to it? So there's another group, an audience that we need to focus on as well, and that is people during or after a disaster impact. And in this case, we think that that's two sets of people. They're either directly impacted and they're willing to take mitigation, adaptation, and recovery actions, or they're not directly impacted, but they want to help others. So if you think about it, there's almost 3 different audience slices that could be addressed in different ways as we want citizens to take action against climate change. And we think that these are, good starting approaches to that. And we're going to explore this further in the course of our ongoing research. So having done all this work, we came back to the running lean approach, which says you have to find a problem and then you have to find the solution fit. So we worked on something called business canvases to come up with ideas very quickly. These are 2 examples of business canvases that we created. And then we started to drill down in filling in those canvases. So we had identified a problem, which is that citizens receive flood awareness information, in this case, for a disaster that isn't personalized for their needs. What could the solution be? Well, we could provide a website with relevant specific tasks based on the citizen's personal circumstances, local geography, and flood risk. And the unique value proposition is that would provide a personalized list of actions the citizens could take. So we think it's more likely they would take actions in these scenarios. So we tossed around some ideas. We started working on that based on our findings, and that's what we came up with the problem solution fit. So let's talk about, let's show you the mock-ups and prototypes that we're working on. So these are works in progress. Some of these are working functionality, some of them aren't. Some of them are concepts that we explored. Some of them are concepts that our students who were working with us on this ongoing project have explored. So these are intended to give you the idea of the art of the possible. So the key ingredients are we have lots of technical and non-technical challenges. We want to move at 2 speeds. We want to innovate rapidly in the short term, but we want to think long term, and we want to ask people for help and feedback all the way along. And overall, we want to empathize because this is intended to help citizens, and they're the ones who are likely to be affected by climate change impacts, and they're the ones who need to mitigate and to recover from them. And we're trying to help them and ourselves because, of course, we're citizens too. So we looked into different concepts, and these are only some of them. We recognized very early on that we needed to gather a list of actions that people could take, and there's a lot of content out there. So we thought that maybe we could get a search engine that would go and crawl different sources on the internet and see if we could identify actions that way. So the students at Arizona State University worked on a climate change spider, which basically looks at websites and blogs and articles and events online using metadata that's available online, and identified articles and events that could be of interest and use so that we could use that as a starting point for research. We also worked with the University of Toronto. They actually produced machine learning models that could open up the PDF files that have been published on different portals that contain guidance that people can take to prepare for a flood or to prepare for climate change impacts. These documents range from 2 or 3 pages in a PDF all the way up to hundreds of pages in toolkits. And it's actually really time consuming and onerous to go through them and to figure out what actions you should specifically take. So we thought there was an opportunity here to use machine learning to crack open these PDF files and to extract sentences that are guidance that citizens could take. And in fact, this actually worked. Not only did the University of Toronto put together a small prototype for us where we could upload PDF files and have the actions appear, but somebody used this at the beginning of COVID when guidance was being produced on washing your hands and staying away from people wearing masks. And it was actually able to open those PDF files and extract that guidance. So this is a sign of, you know, obviously the relationship between a pandemic and climate change impacts, but also the fact that this technological approach is very useful. Now, in both these cases, we're using either existing content that's available or we're searching the net, you know, to find other content. But of course, there's an opportunity to partner with organizations that are publishing such information, like insurance companies, for example, or local municipalities that have information on flooding, preparedness, and so on, and get the content directly without necessarily going to all this trouble and making sure that it's properly licensed and so on. But we wanted to explore the different concepts here, and these are 2 examples of what we looked at. We wanted to incentivize citizens to take action. Obviously, you know, during or after a disaster, they're more incentivized, but to get ready for a disaster, we think there's opportunities as well. So the students at Capella University came up with a gamification model where people could have badges in their community based on the actions that they took or if they help others. In this case, you can see examples of badges that are earned or in progress. They came up with the diagram and the designs themselves. They did a really great job at this. And you know, you could compete, you know, with other people and make sure that you're the most prepared for a disaster. And you also get, as we said, points for helping others because we want to make sure that this is collaborative as well. So these are different concepts of how gamification could be used to incentivize citizens to act. So we ourselves at Deploy started working on mock-ups of a citizen mobile app that could be used in a disaster. In this case, we modeled it on the Ottawa-Gatineau floods that have been occurring recently. So as a citizen, you could go to a website, you'd be able to see a checklist of actions, news, events, information on the water level, insurance information, and so on. The checklist might vary depending on whether you're, you know, in the middle of a flood or trying to recover from one. And the news would be curated so that you'd only see things that are relevant to your area and to that disaster. Obviously, we want to protect against fake information, fake news, and misinformation. And we also have this idea that citizens could do observations as well. I mean, you could stand, you know, safely and take a picture of flooding and maybe add some other information that a trusted authority could use when they're actually trying to figure out what's going on with the flood. And on that note, we believe that therefore there's an opportunity to crowdsource. So we're exploring that concept a little bit, but again, from your mobile device and subject to certain conditions, you should be able to upload information on an observation point, a photo that you took, and that should make it over to a trusted authority location where they could look at this information and decide whether this is helpful or useful or not. And on that note, there has to be a secure area where these authorities work together. In this case, we're building a prototype that we'll show you at our deep dive, not today, but next week. But we'll show you some screenshots today. So the idea is that we have these tiles that, again, provide information to citizens in part. So there's the checklist again, but also information that the trusted authorities may want to use. So they have the ability to modify this information. It's hosted in the cloud. They have the ability to see the information on a map dynamically, and they can click the different tiles to have information like sandbagging regions appear and disappear. So if you're managing a flood disaster, you'd be able to find out where the sandbag locations are, and you could provide that information to the news media or to, you know, interested or concerned citizens, or to your colleagues who are helping you with the flood disaster response. And this is just a closer look at some of the tiles and some of the data tables, because we want the ability for the trusted authorities to create and to view and to sort information really, really quickly. As we're putting together the prototype, we come up with new concepts for data that they might be interested in. And so we're already looking at emergency shelters and charging stations, sandbag locations, a list of trusted news and social media channels, volunteer groups, and so on. And the list goes on. These are all things that could be of interest in terms of communicating with citizens if you're a government authority or another trusted authority and you're tasked with doing so. Of course, you would want to have lots and lots of reporting at your fingertips and to do data analytics. So we also have the concept of having reports using Tableau Server. And you can drill down on, in this case, precipitation. This might be a concern if you're in a flood. You'd want to know what it's likely to be given previous histories in the area. And then that data, in this case, we're gathering from the weather stations that are in the Ottawa-Gatineau region. So as a data scientist, you could download this data and you can modify it further. And we think that this would be part of any prototype or any solution that a trusted authority would want to have. Now, other things that could be used to provide value and meaning, obviously satellite data. Satellites are taking pictures and they're used readily during flood disasters. And so we think there's an opportunity to use machine learning and satellite images to improve the reporting that's available to trusted authorities during, in our example, a flood. So this is an example of screenshots of how evacuation reports could be done by detecting vehicles. So if you have a satellite view of the area that's being flooded, you would want to know how many vehicles are in there. Over time, are there more vehicles there? Is there a bottleneck? Are they leaving? Are they evacuating? This is important information. And so drilling down on in this case, the worldview satellite image, you can see some trucks. And this is courtesy of a partner, Terra Aura Monitoring. So we're working with them to get this capability integrated into our flood management prototype. And they're providing the vehicle detection functionality and the machine learning behind that. And related to that, we've been talking to them and we think that potentially a heat map could be useful to trusted authorities. So in this example, you might want to know that a lot of people are around a certain emergency center, so maybe you send people elsewhere, or you could use a heat map to determine if the evacuation route, like an auto route, is blocked up. At a glance, what kind of information can we provide to a trusted authority such that they could quickly view and react? And of course, anything that gets developed needs to be developer and system integration friendly because you want to make sure that it can be rapidly extended or the information can be brought in from other systems which are available often or exported quickly to, for other uses. So we think that's an important element as well. So in conclusion, climate change is a growing threat and adaptation and risk mitigation are needed. We spent 2 years working with hundreds of citizens, NGOs, students, government officials, asking them about their attitudes to climate change, and we validated that there's a critical communication gap between citizens and trusted authorities. And the top 3 problems are that citizens feel overwhelmed, citizens receive information that isn't personalized, trusted authorities have difficulty directly collaborating and sharing information with citizens, and 70% of Canadian citizens we surveyed think climate change is at least somewhat important to them. Respondents in urban areas are more likely to believe climate change is real and caused by humans, but they're more negative and feel less in control about their ability to act, while respondents in rural areas are more likely to think positively about local environmental conservation and they feel more empowered to act. And we think there's a key finding. The most used information sources are social media and websites and blogs, and we think that's going to continue. Scientists, environmental groups, and federal government officials are the most trusted for information about climate change, but trust is a contentious and complex issue and we need to explore it further. Nearly 70% of people we surveyed would be willing to use a website or mobile app listing personal actions to cope with climate change disasters. So based on our findings, we think that multiple portals are needed to communicate in different ways with different citizen segments. And we produced numerous concept mockups to explore different issues and features. We are working on a prototype, starting with the Trust Authority portal, which could be used to communicate, in this case, during a flood disaster. And that is a really quick glance at everything that we're looking at here and everything we've been working on. If you want to see more, then please attend our deep dive on April 28th, and you can register for free with GeoIgnite. Before I leave, I'd like to especially thank Justin Mosby, our Research and Development and Innovation Manager, is a major contributor to this research. I'd like to thank all the interviewees and survey respondents, students and professors, and deployed staff and contractors who've worked on this ongoing project. And we're incredibly grateful to them. And thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for attending today's presentation.
And we're back. Hey, Nick, Hey, how are you doing, John?
How's it going? Great talk. Thanks a lot. Always appreciate it, especially today. It is Earth Day.
It is.
So we've got time for a few questions. I see there's some stuff coming in from the Q&A. Let's start. Let's answer one of these live. It's from Jake. Would you use these applications or another method to deliver education about climate change to those who don't believe?
Yes, the question of belief is an important one here. And there was a question earlier about why I use the word belief rather than understanding. Yes, we accept that that climate change is real, caused by humans. We understand that science. There are many people who do not. And what we're trying to do here is to build a solution that's useful to people, that would give them positive actions that they could take that would make a difference. We're still exploring all these ramifications. These are very complicated issues. Clearly, we're a software company. We're trying to do our best to deliver something that would add the value. So it's quite possible that we wouldn't actually get bogged down in questions about climate change per se or local environmental conservation if there's an opportunity to share actions, positive actions that happen to satisfy, the need. So that's actually something that we're looking at, where we may sidestep these conversations entirely. But in order to approach this properly, we really had to explore all these different concepts, and we're still exploring them. And we're working with a lot of people who have a better understanding of that than we do. But ultimately, the software has to be useful for people, and it is possible that to be the most useful, it would not actually be the job of the software to educate anybody about it, but merely just say, you should do this, you may do this, do not do this.
We've got some more questions coming in. Let's answer another one from C. McKinnon. What types of focused apps do you see making the biggest impact in the least amount of time?
Yeah, so there's a variety of different ways that this can be tackled. And again, we're still exploring the different options and so on, but we believe that actions that are very focused on probably, preparing for an imminent disaster, a very obvious and focused one, rather than trying to address all the things, would be probably the most useful approach. So we are looking at, flood disaster as an example, because that's a pretty obvious one, and that's happened in the Ottawa Gatineau area. But to come up with the functionality and the capabilities to satisfy that kind of disaster would also, therefore, we believe, be able to work on other types of disaster. So we think that focused solution that would allow the authorities who would be managing such a disaster to communicate with their colleagues and the citizens, as well as the citizen focus side of things, would address that need, very quickly, and then it could be expanded on from there. So these are big topics, lots to talk about. On that note, I know that we have the deep dive next week. So actually 30 minutes was not really a lot of time to go into a lot of our findings. We're going to explore them in more detail next week. I certainly would encourage the attendees here to look into that if they're interested.
Absolutely. And thanks for mentioning that. That was what I was going to close on. We're already eating into our break. Nick, thank you so much. Everybody, I strongly encourage everybody here, tell others, come out to see Deploy Solutions, Nick Kellett, next Wednesday. It's a free workshop ticket, and you're going to learn a lot more. All right.
Thanks, John.
Thank you very much. All right, everybody, we're going into the next break.